Hello and welcome to Totally Abstracted. I painted a bigger piece last week and it literally fell on my head while I was working on it. And that's not even the main point of this episode, but it does tell you quite a lot about the reality of trying to paint large in a very small space. I've got a tiny box room as my studio, not much wall space, not much room to step back. So I had this 60 by 90 centimetre piece balanced on my desk, and at one point it just went straight onto my head. I'd like to say I handled it gracefully, but I did not. But the real part I want to talk about today isn't the logistics. It was how it felt painting and how it felt after painting, because these were two different things. While I was painting, it all felt amazing. I felt looser, more physical, less careful. My arm was moving differently. My body was more involved. I wasn't making small, contained marks. I was making gestures, bigger movements, less control, but more energy. And there was something really freeing about that. It didn't feel tight or overthought in the way painting sometimes can. It felt open, instinctive, alive. I was less in my head, less editing as I went. There wasn't that constant small negotiation between mark and intention that happens when you're working at a scale where you can see everything at once. And I remember thinking while I was doing it, this is good. This is how I want to paint. But then I stepped back from it and I suddenly had this really uncomfortable moment. The work didn't quite feel like me. And that's what I want to talk about today, because I don't think this is just about scale. I think it's about identity. There was this strange split. I preferred how it felt to paint that piece, but I preferred how my smaller work looks. And that tension has really stayed with me the more I look at that large painting. It's currently hanging above the fireplace in the living room to see if I can get used to it. Usually when something feels good in the process, it shows in the result. There's a connection there. When you're loose and present and not overthinking, it tends to come through in the work. So it was genuinely surprising that this didn't happen, when the feeling of freedom didn't translate into something that felt like mine. So I started trying to understand what was actually going on, because nothing about my intentions had changed. I wasn't trying to paint differently, and I wasn't aiming for a different outcome, but something had changed. And I think it's this. Your style isn't just what you paint, it's how you move. When I paint smaller, sometimes like A4 or A3, or something square but that rough size, there's a certain rhythm to it. The decisions happen quite quickly. The feedback loop is tight. I make a mark, I see it, I respond. And you can see that if you watch any of my videos. There's a familiarity there, a kind of conversation. And I think that conversation has a particular pace that I've internalised over time without ever really noticing. The rhythm feels natural because I've done it enough that it lives in my body now, not just in my head. But when I went bigger, that changed. The timing changed, the spacing changed, the way the marks related to each other changed. Suddenly I was working in a slightly different language and one I don't have fluency in yet. I know what I want to say, but the words aren't quite coming out right. The marks were looser, yes, but they weren't necessarily my marks. Or maybe they were my marks, but not fully understood yet at that scale. And I think that's the key, because my first instinct was to think, something's gone wrong here. But I don't actually think that's true. I think what's happened is I've moved into a different version of my work, and I haven't quite learned how to be myself there yet. I think it's a bit like your voice sounding different in a large room. It's still your voice, but it carries differently. You might need to slow down or project differently. Maybe let the pauses be longer. The voice is the same, but the way you use it has to adjust. And I think the same feels true here. The sensibility is mine as well as the instincts, but I haven't yet figured how to deploy them at this scale in a way that feels coherent. So I've decided something. Instead of seeing this as, I've lost something, I'm going to try to see it as, I'm learning how my work behaves at a different scale, because that feels more useful. It means now there's something to explore, not something to fix. And that shift from what went wrong to what am I learning is quite a significant one. And I don't think it comes naturally to all of us, certainly not to me. The first instinct is always to diagnose the problem and correct it. But sometimes there isn't a problem, there's just a process. So now I've got two 60 by 60 centimetre panels to work on this weekend. And I'm going into those a bit differently. Not trying to recreate the smaller works, not trying to force it all back into something familiar, but being more aware of what makes my work feel like mine. Things like the way I build atmosphere, the way space opens up, and the way I let light in, and of course the kinds of marks I return to again and again. These are decisions I tend to make instinctively, and I want to see how these translate, or don't, at a larger scale. Because I think it's worth paying attention to the things that do transfer. Not everything will feel different. Some things will carry across naturally, and those are worth noticing because they're probably the things that are most essentially mine. And I think that's the real work here. Not just painting bigger, but understanding how my voice shifts when the conditions change. And maybe also accepting that the shift is part of the deal. I can't expand into a new scale, or a new medium, or a new way of working, and expect it to feel immediately right. There's always a period of translation. And that period can really feel uncomfortable, like I've lost something. When actually the truth is, I'm just in the middle of learning something. So maybe that's something to notice in your own work too. If something suddenly feels different, if it feels better in one way but less like you in another, it doesn't necessarily mean you've gone off track. It might just mean you're in a new version of the same conversation and you're still learning how to speak in that conversation. So I'll let you know how those next pieces go, and hopefully, fingers crossed, without any more paintings falling on my head. Thank you for listening. Keep exploring, keep experimenting, and as always, keep things totally abstracted.